Hello, fellow humans. Welcome back to my channel. This is going to be the second part of my deconversion story. I think it'll probably end up being 3 parts in total, but I'm not sure. My name is Amanda, and I'm an aspiring health coach and a psychiatric survivor. Ultimately, what I want to do is help people taper off psychiatric medications and install a neuroprotective lifestyle. Um, so I'm documenting my journey towards becoming a health coach, and including how I'm dealing with my own health issues and with my own mental health. So, towards that end, I'm making a series of videos about my metaphysical beliefs and my ongoing deconstruction process from evangelical Christianity. So, I have made this earlier today. I made gluten-free bread and I have it in the oven. This is good because it's going to restrict me. I have less than an hour to share more about my deconversion experience, which, in case you haven't noticed, I struggle with being concise. So, one thing, if you have watched my previous video where I talk about my upbringing in Christianity, my journey towards evangelicalism, I want to just clarify something. I trailed off a bit because I couldn't remember the term for it. But when I was younger, my grandmother was part of and then eventually in charge of the altar guild for my Episcopal parish. I couldn't remember what that was called. It's called the altar guild. And so I want to talk about another point in time that I didn't mention in my first video, and that is that I could be said to have dabbled in Christianity again from time to time in my life. And I guess you could say there were like peaks and valleys, and there were high points where I was really interested in it and interested in reading the Bible. And interestingly, I think one of these points came before my conversion to evangelical Christianity. It came on its own because I was living in a place of poverty and I was being exploited at work, and I did feel that I needed to get close to the Bible specifically because I felt like reading it would help me draw strength. If you are familiar with the story of the Israelites, they were the underdogs of their particular time and place, and they really got their shit kicked out of them again and again and again, in some very, very heinous ways. So, I mean, if you're really suffering and you are of a mind to put it in context, like put it in a spiritually reframe it, say in a spiritually meaningful way, and you want to like align yourself or identify with people who have suffered, the Bible's a good place to start. Although the Bible is ultimately, this will always be my response to anyone who asks me what led me to deconvert. I will say the Bible. Hands down, it was not one particular experience or it was the Bible itself. And I have to tell you that I have been going through something emotionally recently since making the first video. One of the things that I assumed about deconstruction that turns out to be wrong is that I just assumed that you would get to a place where you would definitively in your mind part from Christianity and be able to announce to yourself, I don't believe this anymore, and just carry on. And that it would be kind of one and done. It would just be a point in time, and it's not like that. It's definitely not like that. just like converting to Christianity for many people is not a big, decisive, dramatic point in time. They may be won over by arguments or things that are exposed to over time. They may have gradually become Christians, although you don't really hear them talk about that a lot. You hear them more dramatic testimonies. That's what you hear on social media. Just like that, deconstruction is an ongoing process with ongoing struggles and difficulties that arise that put you through the emotional ringer, and you don't always feel better. And sometimes you have, emotional highs and lows that go along with a major change in your outlook. So I guess I am experiencing a real low point in my deconstruction process. One of the YouTubers I really like to watch is Jen Fishburne. Her channel is called Answers from Genesis, Jenesis. I really value her content because of all the deconstructionists that I have watched. There's been many. Her base of knowledge is extreme. Okay. She's unlike a lot of us. She's unlike me and a lot of the content creators in the sense that her personality is such that she would have made a great lawyer. And she's incredibly intellectual, and she herself says of her personality that she's more of a thinking than a feeling type, and you can totally tell. But it's so wonderful to watch because she has done a lot of the work of educating herself that I tried to undertake, but frankly, I'm just too lazy, or other things. I'm unfocused, like other things take my attention and my time away from that. But so I recommend her because she, during her Christian phase of life, basically went through an education process similar to somebody going to seminary. She had her own tutor. She did a ton of research. So her command of these topics and also of other topics outside of it is she does very, very, very well educated, and I highly recommend it. So back to my journeys, my wanderings, let's say. There's no other way to describe it, but kind of meanderings through Christianity and through spiritual beliefs. There was a phase before these two evangelical Christians proselytized to me. There was a phase where I took to reading the Bible very vigorously. I wanted to finish it. I wanted to know that I had read it cover to cover. And it was a winter before my union campaign. I think I might have been working for hotels. I don't think I was at the restaurant where I did that campaign yet. But I was really I was really feeling very poor, and I was really tired of service work, and I was also tired of income inequality in our country being as accelerated as it appeared to be during that time. I was just having the struggles of a millennial woman who's not got any family, like, to lean back on. Um, and so I took to reading the Bible specifically because years before I had noticed the law of attraction becoming more and more popular. And I wasn't a Christian. I wasn't a practicing or professing Christian back in 2010, 2011. I didn't really want to go to church. I didn't, you know, I had been Catholic. I'd been married to a Catholic. I divorced and I didn't go to church and I didn't see this as like a deconversion process. So the the capture that required me to go full deconstruction was the evangelicals. Okay. Now I'll explain more about that. So wander in and out of Christianity pretty freely because in my opinion, it didn't capture me. It didn't get its hooks into me. It didn't um, become as much a part of my emotional life and my it changed my thinking to the degree until these charismatics entered my life. Okay, until the depression that brought them into my life had me become saved and all. Then I'll explain more, but I mean, I was really in a charismatic place. I spoke in tongues. There was faith healing going on. There was a lot of what other Christians looked down upon, like what I was raised to look down upon, these practices suddenly became valid to me. Things like hedges of protection and praying and believing in demons, being afraid of demons. Um, so that is still with me. And I'm still dealing with that particular brand of Christianity and the psychological damage from it. So, but prior to this, during this time in my 30s, I was getting increasingly annoyed at the popularity of the law of attraction because I saw it as being contrary to social justice. And I was very much what other people would label in the derogatory a social justice warrior. I just was. I was, I still am in many ways, but I was mostly saddened and dismayed at the absolute clobbering of labor by capital and how nobody would ever even talk about people in terms of labor and capital and class. And when the recession really set in, that's when books like The Secret really took off. And all I could do was think it was also at the same time that Harry Potter was becoming popular. And I just remember thinking, how can there be this many other adults who are reading children's books? I mean, both of them. It's just like effing, you know, what? Like, it's like magical thinking that you could only expect someone below the age of 8 to really and then their preferred. So I was a writer and I was writing a novel in the early 2000s, no, 2010 thereabout, and that's when like people would say, "Oh, you want to be a writer? Um, look at yeah, that's great. Pursue your passion, follow your dreams, girl. Because look at J.K. Rowling and look at E.L. James, and like they really hit it big. So you keep going." And then I would just be like, I was like, this is porn and this is fairy stories. Are you telling me that if I want to pursue my dreams of making a living as a writer, I was like, my best bet is probably to write some kind of porn with fairies, like fucking fairies fucking each other, okay? Because this is nonsense. But I understood that life had become so dull and crappy for most Americans. I guess other adults were like, this is what the escapist, easy, low intellectual, lowbrow bullshit, right? And that really stuck with me. And I just remember reading The Secret and thinking, it's disturbing that a grown person can read this. And then it really started to work on me because um I recalled from my Christian upbringing the myth of the garden, the snake, and the fall of man. And what does the snake tell Eve? That she can be like God. If she eats of the tree, and then their eyes will be open and they'll have knowledge of good and evil. And the snake is an agent of Lucifer, who's the light bringer, but who's the bad guy because he rebelled against God. And ultimately, the desire to be God is what was causing these problems with the beings that are not God, and led to original sin, which led to the crappy world that I inhabited that was really shredding social justice, and making more and more and more and more and more and more people poor, and also confusing them. Do you see where I'm going with this? Kind of, I know it's right. Right. So in my social justice warrior-ness, I went back to the Bible and I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna straighten this shit out. Like these people, because the law of attraction is Lucifer dressed up in 21st century, not even really that dressed up. But I was like, do you not see? And so this became like a thing with me. It became an axe to grind with me. So I had to like readopt a Christian worldview in order to just disapprove of what I saw at the time was this gross justification. And it was always, the law of attraction was always promoted in popular culture by obscenely rich celebrities like Oprah, who were in a position of power and influence and who said nothing, for instance, about the 2008 financial crisis and what a debacle of greed that was. Okay. So yeah, and I would just see it. I just saw it. I took on this very Christian conspiratorial mindset about popular culture, the leakage of things like this into popular culture, and it made me, I think it primed me. I was already setting myself up before I had my grand emotional cataclysm that led to me being saved. So there was that time. And interestingly enough, that was probably the first attempt that I made to read the Bible cover to cover. And I read a lot. And interestingly enough, I think because the attitude that I brought to it, which was that I needed to like really solidify these anti New Age, anti LOA beliefs, I wasn't troubled. I wasn't troubled at that time by the Bible and its contents. I was thinking just like kind of not, I don't know. It's like I was reading, but I wasn't taking it in. Okay, so then that was that. And then that was like maybe a year or two before the 2017 depression that put me in touch with Patty and Rick. And Patty and Rick started taking me to this ministry, which was really two people in who had rented a hotel suite, like a conference room. We would always meet in this particular conference room of a hotel because they didn't have their own building yet. But their names were, well, we call her, okay. So it was a couple, and we'll call them Bertha and Ned. Bertha and Ned were married, and they were interesting. I mean, there's an interesting dynamic between them. Bertha was the orator, although I use that term really creatively to describe what was coming out of her. And Ned was the clairvoyant. So they were both part of what I now have been able to identify as the New Apostolic Reformation, which is this movement within the non-denominational heading, following the flow charts. Okay. So this kind of Christianity was very appealing to me, and I still miss it. And it wouldn't surprise people why it was appealing to me. Because even though I was very averse to the law of attraction, I was also, going way back, I was pretty new age in the sense that I have always loved things like yoga and crystals, even Buddhism. I explored some in my youth. So yeah, I mean, I worked in health food stores and was part of the scene in the 90s. In metropolitan areas in the 90s, things were really kicking off. So at any rate, um, I didn't make the connections at the time, but some Christian apologists who take issue with the charismatic movement and the NAR folks, New Apostolic Reformation, do so because they see crossover and overlap between New Age practices and NAR services. So at no point in my Christian upbringing did I have as many altered states sort of experiences as when I started going to these services. You are very emotionally primed. There's a very active worship element, which I very much enjoyed because I had been brought in a state of like suicidal, rigid, almost psychotic depression. I was so depressed that I had a few things going on. I didn't want to see my friends during that whole winter that I was depressed because I was so convinced that I felt so bad that like I was literally on the outside I thought I was becoming like ugly, haggard, disfigured in a way. It's very strange to explain, but I was concerned that if like I went to see my friend after having been feeling this bad for weeks, that my friend would take a look at me and be like, "What is going on with you?" And I didn't want to like deal with it. And then I mean, this belief would be so strong that I would look in the mirror and I would see my face, and I would be surprised that it was not disfigured, not ugly, like not like I felt on the inside. So I was having these really weird, warped, very new features of the depression. And all of this later was sort of framed by the evangelist couple and the couple that led the ministry as potentially demonic oppression. In fact, Bertha even went so far as to say that the area that I had been living in, there was a lot of witchcraft, and it was sort of like a territory. Um, so I kind of got sucked into this because my experience of coming out of it had been so rapid and so powerful. And then, in an effort to be the best Christian that I could, I started to read the Bible again. And I contrasted my earlier experiences in the Catholic and the Episcopal denominations like this. I said to Patty, I said, basically, other worship services and this high church liturgy based worship service to me after having experienced what I've experienced here, is like going to a museum. So you go to a museum, you look at exhibits of things that happened long, long ago, that there's such a distance between God, there's such a distance between yourself and these things that you're seeing, that it's like visiting a museum. Literally, Stations of the Cross could be like dioramas, and then you go and you observe and you like read. It's like going to visit a museum. It is not an active connection to God, in my opinion. It's not like having, because these people, they would talk about, you're going to have a relationship with Jesus, you're going to have a spiritual walk, you're a new Christian, there's phases, there's a progression to it. There's this deep, intimate psychological journey that you're going on. And this was different than how faith had been framed with me before, frankly. Also, I guess another thing about it was that it was okay that this newer version of God cared about the details of my life. And this is where it gets tricky, it gets problematic, right? Because my Episcopal grandmother never mentioned things like spiritual attack. We didn't talk about how to talk to God, or she would have like really not cared for me speaking in tongues. A lot of things that are just like distasteful, you know, to the Christians who raised me. Now I understood and felt on a deeper level. For instance, speaking in tongues. They call it getting your prayer language. So I think a lot of people are very put off by it, because it's like, oh, you're making yourself appear crazy and you're talking gibberish. But if you surrender and you check your ego beliefs and your judgments, and it's disinhibiting, right? So first of all, if you're in a service, it's to drive you to the point of disinhibiting yourself so that you fully fall back on God. And if you're going to work someone up, you want to make them part of the group, by disinhibiting that, so you can overcome their resistance and psychologically envelop them. If you get them to do something that makes them look ridiculous, frankly. So, I mean, I see how that works, but on another level, when I started to do it, what I realized neurologically is going on is that what meditators call your monkey mind gets shut down, because you're engaged in making these vocalization sounds, and that occupies a place in your brain, so that the interrupting thoughts that we have arise as our monkey mind can't go on, because your brain's engaged in a different way. So honestly, people should be a little bit more respectful when making fun of people who speak in tongues, because it's a form of meditation that some Christians practice. It's not, and for me, what it did was make a prayerful space in my mind, so that if there was something that God needed to tell me, I could listen, shut the fuck up and listen and have more intuition. Okay, so many New Age practices are about really achieving a better state of alignment in yourself, so that you can have intuition, so that you can be a little bit more aware. So it's causing fits for a whole vein of Christian apologists that I subsequently got into. Okay, so this is what's going on. So I'm going, and for a time I have moved. It's like this whole new chapter in my life. I got out of the ghetto. I was doing better financially. I had this brand new family. We were all behaving like a family. We'd have, holidays, and we'd just hang out. And I was great for a time. That was the honeymoon phase. Okay. And then I had to ruin all of that by actually reading the foundational text that all of this was supposedly based on. And that was like, to this day, I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, I've met so many Christians, professing Christians. I met people in Christian rock bands who've never read the Bible. For real, really. Oh my God. And I guess that's what's still giving me fits. So back to my story. So that honeymoon phase, I'm doing better. It seems like the depression is lifted. I'm having this whole new renaissance phase of my life. I moved to be closer to this family that's adopted me. My roommate is their oldest child who, interestingly enough, I'm not even really gonna, maybe I will, but like my roommate was their oldest daughter who was a trans man. Okay, so the evangelical couple, Patty and Rick, in part were driven to the ministry because they were belonging to like Assemblies of God and non-denominational, more Pentecostal churches. Then when it came about that their oldest daughter became transgender, first a lesbian, then transgender, and their middle child was a gay boy. So, and then their third child was a special needs, autistic, mentally retarded person in the sense that, like, Forrest Gump is mentally retarded. He had a very, very, very low IQ, but he was not a Down's child. So they have these very, very, very not typical children. And at this time in their faith life, they're encountering a lot of friction from people who tell them that they should be disowning, particularly the oldest two, and they're loving parents, and they would never do that. So they've had a lot of hurt. They're very church hurt people, and they developed an affinity for these people that they met who were starting their own ministry. Okay, and who are not going to tell them to disown their children. Okay, so my roommate was the transgender person. I guess I'll call him Dylan. Okay, so and that was great. He was great. She was great. Whatever. I'm not even really into being told what to. I'm just not even being into being told about pronouns these days. Don't even. Okay, so Dylan was a great person, all around great person. If he wants to do that to her body, then she can, I guess. I don't agree that people can just change their sex. I'm sorry. I'll do a whole other video on why I'm a bad liberal, but at the time, it wasn't like an issue for me. And I was really, really happy for a while. And then all that happened was I started trying to, I guess, maintain, when you first have these experiences, you get to a spiritual high. You get a spiritual connection with what you think is God, and you start to really reframe everything going on in your life. And then you want to maintain that, and it becomes an addiction. Jen Fishburne has a whole series on religion as addiction that I'm working my way through. Uh, but it is very true. So, one of the reasons why I want to make these videos to document my experience is because I am noticing a lot of things that are having directly to do with mental health, that I see my story reiterated, and I see testimony after testimony, particularly of young people. And it gives me pause, okay, as a psychiatric survivor. But basically, what I see going on is an incredible number of people on social media sharing testimonies about coming out of the new age into evangelical Christianity. At one point, I believed that the depression that I suffered that led to this conversion experience, I brought it on myself because I had a statue of a Buddha that I'd bought in the Virgin Islands that came with me to Norristown, and I would meditate. I would do like guided meditations, and I just liked the Buddha statue. It was pretty, it was turquoise. Well, according to my new Christian family, that was an idol. So having an idol in my house and being open to Buddhism, it might have, which everybody knows that everything not Christian is demonic. This was the huge conflict that ultimately I was like, and I'm still dealing with it today. Okay. So what I see going on are many, many, in particular young people, but it doesn't have to be young, it could be anybody. People who have trauma and abuse in their background are very easily spiritually activated. They are susceptible to belief in the metaphysical, and they are more drawn to either very charismatic religions with a high demand for belief in the supernatural, or to things like Wicca, witchcraft, paganism, even yoga and crystals, New Age, because there's a desire on the part of a trauma and abuse victim to dissociate. Altered states seem more appealing. If you battle with the low self-esteem that has been inflicted on you for toxic shame, or an enlarged superego, or obsessive compulsive behavior, or depression or anxiety, these things come about through really bad parenting, trauma, and abuse. Things like bullying, things like sexual abuse, things that if you're already there, then the conflicts that naturally erupt in a young person by the time they're 14 or 15, when you're struggling to define yourself in the world, you're struggling with your sexuality awakening, all of these things can be made more intense and more painful for somebody who has been abused as a child or experienced some other form of trauma. Okay? You're not going to have an easy transition. No one's transition through teenagers is easy, but I think it's particularly difficult for some types of people. If that is the case with you, say, then you will resort to things like tarot, I don't know, whatever the metaphysical thing is that's come up in your TikTok, or there's a metaphysical store right below me right now. I'm friends with the owner. He's my neighbor. He owns the building next door. Okay, he's a gay Wiccan witch, whatever. I don't care. So, but if you get into that, and then I'm seeing an incredible number of testimonies from evangelical Christians who say that they did get into that, and then they had an encounter with the dun 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 demons, demons, the goddamn demons. I mean, the demonic. I mean, everything is demonic. And then they realized that they had to turn to Jesus, and when they did, then everything turned around, and there was spiritual attack. The spiritual warfare crowd are capturing the minds of the youth at a rate that maybe I can't even get my head around it. Maybe I don't know the truth of it. Maybe it seems like this is going on a lot because of social media, and because I'm also fascinated and transfixed by it. I'm like, okay, but this is what I see happening. And I have an alternative explanation. As I said, if you choose to go the route of dissociation, then you're kind of setting yourself up potentially for some sort of conflict to erupt. Because you can only dissociate and you can only run from your pain for so long. But if you keep doing that, it might take the form of these otherworldly experiences, which I'm tempted to pretend to be a clinical psychologist and label these might be hallucinatory in nature. I myself have had hallucinations. I've had auditory hallucinations. They were very, very, very unkind and unpleasant. But it turns out that people who've experienced domestic violence in their household are prone to these kinds. When they have a psychotic episode, that tends to be a feature of it. This is something that's statistically been studied and known. So what I'm saying is this: for the person who's exhausted mentally and spiritually, who's been trying to control their environment, because that is the other thing that these occult practices offer to abuse victims. A sense of control that the abuse has actively broken down. Okay? And unfortunately, we need to talk about why. And then, okay. So if you are a child whose parents are abusive, you will not develop healthy self-esteem, both because they're not giving you the inputs with which to develop the self-esteem, but also because you all of a sudden need to believe that you're causing it because you're a bad person. Now, why do you need that belief? You need that belief because while it's ongoing, that belief is actually preferable to believing that it's random and it's arbitrary. Because if it's random and it's arbitrary, and you can be visited again and again with the abuse, then that's horrible. If it's because you're a bad person, this opens a little bit of a crack in the door. You can see yourself getting control over it. Maybe if you become a better person, it will stop. And the hope that it will stop is something that you need so badly, because the alternative is this is just the way it is. Okay? Now that's how abuse turns you inside out and it pits you against yourself. Okay? So, if you are already prone to that, let's say that you get into your whatever, garden variety, witchcraft, Ouija board, whatever. And then you have this encounter with the demonic, and then you're cleansed of that through Jesus Christ and accepting Jesus into your heart. Now, essentially, what you have is a way to override the trauma and abuse, not by dissociating, but by getting very, very, very involved in a narcissistic relationship. So the narcissist, that is God, is going, your primary emotional directive is towards him, towards the narcissist. So you're going to reorg your life, and you're going to get temporary relief from the conflicts that manifested as demons, frankly. Because the conflicts that manifested as demons have to do with a repressive effect. Okay, like when you take a beach ball and you shove it underwater and then you let go and it pops back up. This is what people attempt to do when they dissociate from their pain. Until you learn, and that's what drives addiction. Anybody who's been in a place of pain and then like tried to sort of numb out with addiction will tell you that it cost them years of maturity because the pain just kept popping back. It gets stronger. Okay, so this is, and there's a metaphor about this in the Bible where Jesus says that if you drive out an evil spirit from somebody, that evil spirit goes and finds 6 of its buddies, and they come back and they take hold of the person. Only this time, there's not just one, but there's 7 different inhabitants. And now I'm doing something that used to irritate me very much when I was a professing evangelical new Christian, which is I am now using a story from the Bible metaphorically instead of literally, but whatever. So anyway, I see this a lot in social media. What I don't see as much of is the third part of the trilogy, which is, okay, you dissociate, you have your woo-woo, new age, occult, demonic practices, you repent of that, and you throw yourself into this relationship with God, which is going to help you then distance yourself from your pain because it's another form of repression. It's different. The goal is you're still doing that. So now you just got to concentrate on making yourself the best person you can be so that the narcissist deems you worthy and won't annihilate you. So, in other words, let's say you started off as an abused child, then you ran this gauntlet of like metaphysical practices and altered states. And now, guess what? You're in a new abusive relationship. And you think it's great. Why? Okay, because you don't understand it as such. And that is essentially what has happened to me in my life on more than one level. Okay, so from having been abused as a child and having basically entered adulthood, early adulthood, as one big walking wound, is one big walking wound as a result of that, like just like a magnetic force field for like narcissists and sociopaths and whatever, like because I needed that. I know people say, no, you didn't need that, you didn't need to suffer, but no, I don't see it as suffering, I see it as learning. So the new Christians, they had this concept that we didn't talk about in my Christian upbringing. It's called discernment. Okay, is another thing I liked about them. These new concepts, I could get down with them intellectually, believe it or not. Being very analytical actually didn't repel me from charismatics, didn't repel me from charismatic Christians. So but I see now the parallels between getting married to somebody who could be termed a narcissist for sure, um, and how my relationship with him, I felt safe. I literally felt like I had a safe place away from my parents. And I felt like I would literally say in my head, well, he loves me and he's all that. So it's disproving, what my mom calling me a stupid little spoiled rotten nasty bitch all the time. And like my dad being basically so it felt like I was overriding that, and I could, really, now all I had to do was get in this marriage and stay in this marriage, and but I wasn't dealing with my pain. I wasn't being realistic. That's the thing. I wasn't realistic. I wasn't self-aware. Um and I was doing more repression than ever. Okay? And it made me vulnerable because it pre-programmed me for the uses of somebody who themselves was abused as a child. And then we had the whole trauma bonding, like basically learning more and more. Because also at the time that I was converting and then deconverting from evangelical Christianity was the time when social media was all also ablaze with narcissism, narcissistic abuse syndrome, how to recover, how to recognize, and that was going on. So I was reading the Bible. I was really getting into it. I was really gonna learn as much as I could. And I was reading the Old Testament, and I was also on social media watching like Dr. Romani and Richard Grannon and all of these things about narcissistic abuse. And then there came a point in time when, okay, here I am. My life is materially and externally better than ever. And yet internally, I could feel creeping on the depression was coming back, coupled with new like tentacles of anxiety. And I was becoming bound up in, I would say, obsessive thoughts, weird thoughts, superstitious thoughts, um, because of the fear of the demonic. And I was reading the Old Testament and listening to neuropsychological material surfacing about narcissistic abuse. I was sort of taking stock of my memories of being married and then noticing these parallels. And I said to myself, okay, I'm not in a relationship. I'm not being abused. I'm I'm better than ever. So I have more, I'm not hand to mouth. I feel better. What is the problem here? Why am I having these symptoms internally? Hypervigilance, like I said, depression, bouts of that seem to correlate with narcissistic abuse syndrome. And because then I had to look at, well, what is the relationship that I'm in? And that is this new relationship that I had with God. And I'm going to stop right there because I'm going to check on my bread.